Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. For days, we've been talking about the Israel-Hamas war spilling over. Tonight, we can tell you it is. The fire has spread to faraway Russia. An airport came under attack in Dagestan. An angry mob forced its way to the runway, looking for Jews they wanted to punish. The pictures are quite dramatic. We'll bring you the full story. Meanwhile, Israel has begun the ground offensive, but the strategy remains unclear. The tanks are rolling in, the airstrikes continue, and the diplomatic wars are also intensifying. Erdogan has now called Netanyahu a terrorist. India has abstained on a resolution calling for a ceasefire. We'll break it down for you. In Bangladesh, political violence ahead of the election. In the Maldives, a major debt crisis looms, but the new president wants to focus on his India Out campaign. In West Africa, a new threat looms. The European Union is giving some countries armored tanks to fight it. And the Earth's core is leaking. Should you be concerned? We'll tell you all about it. The headlines first. The fight over Crimea continues. Russia says it has shot down 8 Ukrainian Storm Shadow missiles fired at Crimea, but Kiev claims to have struck Moscow's air defense system in the peninsula. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. The free trade deal between the European Union and Australia collapses. The talks have been on since 2018. The roadblock is over market access for Australian farm products. The EU is also keen to sign trade deals with major world markets like India and Latin America. China holds major financial conference to get its economy back on track. President Xi Jinping is meeting with the country's top bankers in Beijing. It's a closed-door 2-day conference which happens only twice in a decade. Taiwan's 2 leading opposition parties join hands for the January parliamentary elections, but they stop short of coming together for a presidential ticket. Vice President Lai Ching-te, who is from the ruling party, is currently the frontrunner. Pakistan's Cricket World Cup team has not been paid for 5 months. That's the claim made by its former captain Rashid Latif. The Pakistan Cricket Board and the team have not responded to the allegations. This comes amid Pakistan's dismal performance at the ongoing World Cup. And FIFA bans Luis Rubiales for 3 years. The former Spanish football chief was suspended after he forcibly kissed Jenny Hermoso. In September, Rubiales resigned as the head of the Spanish Football Federation.
На борт, быстро все на борт.
Did you see that? The war in Israel has reached Russia. As the Israeli forces escalate attacks on Hamas, Israelis abroad find themselves at risk. On Sunday, tensions exploded in a Russian region. A mob stormed an international airport. This happened in Dagestan. It is a Muslim-majority region in Russia. People here are angry with Israel. And yesterday, this anger exploded. The locals received some reports. They said a flight from Tel Aviv was landing in Dagestan, and this report unleashed chaos. In no time, a mob showed up at the airport. They broke past security checks. They were looking for Jewish passengers. They asked the airport staff, and I'm quoting, "Where are the Jews?" And soon this mob reached the runway. They surrounded the planes. They started shouting, "Allahu Akbar."
Allahu Akbar!
Ay maşallah.
It was a scary and dangerous situation. Some passengers were leaving their planes. When they saw the mob, they rushed back inside, but the mob was out of control. They broke glass doors. They stopped passengers and asked for their passports. Some people managed to get out safely, but outside the airport, more protesters were waiting for them, presumably part of the same mob. And what were they doing outside? They were stopping cars. They were checking passports of passengers, basically looking for Jews.
They hit with their hands and feet to break through the fence and grill. Here are our cobblestones which they hurled at us. They have also started to crash everything in custom offices and the booths. We are building a spiritual center together. Some of them climbed on top. They destroyed things on the first floor.
Thankfully, there were no casualties. No Israelis were injured, but this was a targeted attack, and it was not the only one. On Saturday, a hotel was overrun in Dagestan. People heard that there were Jews at this hotel, and they threw stones at the hotel's windows. As it turned out, there were no Jews inside. After this, the hotel put up a sign. This is what it said: "Entrance strictly forbidden to citizens of Israel." And in the bracket, it says Jews. Now, Israel has expressed concerns over these events. It has asked Russia to protect Israelis and Jews. But the fire is clearly spreading. Not far from Dagestan is a place called Kabardino-Balkaria. It has a Jewish center that was set ablaze. Now, both Dagestan and Kabardino-Balkaria are Russian republics. There are 22 such republics. They're all part of Russia, but they enjoy some special rights. They have a high degree of autonomy. They can make their own laws, and often they're dominated by certain groups. Take the case of Dagestan. The name itself means the land of mountains. People from 40 different ethnicities live in Dagestan, but the region is dominated by Muslims. More than 3 million people live in Dagestan. Going by one claim, more than 80% of them are Muslims, and a majority of these residents are Sunni Muslims. In fact, Islam has flourished in Dagestan. This region has some 3,000 mosques, Islamic institutes, and schools. It also has a volatile past. From 2007 to 2017, Dagestan witnessed an Islamist insurgency. A range of militant groups was involved. Russian forces fought these groups and eliminated them. But in 2022, there was fresh unrest. Clashes broke out again, this time over the war in Ukraine. Dagestan had the highest number of casualties in the war, the highest number from Russia. Remember, Putin had called up army reservists to fight the war, and this included people from Dagestan. Apparently, they died in larger numbers in the war. Most of the casualties incurred by Russia were from Dagestan. Reports say in 2022, more than 300 soldiers, Russian soldiers from Dagestan died. This is 10 times the death toll of soldiers from Moscow, and this too led to protests. So the region has a volatile history, and now tensions have broken out again. Israel's operations in Gaza have sparked unrest. Pictures and videos of destroyed buildings, dead bodies, and displaced victims have traveled to Dagestan. They've incited angry mobs like this one. Some of them were carrying the Palestinian flag. They wanted to punish Israel for attacking Gaza. And this is a new security nightmare for Moscow. It wants to avoid fresh trouble. So Russia is blaming these recent events on outside influence.
President Putin yesterday evening and this morning received and is receiving detailed reports on the situation in the Republic of Dagestan from the FSB, the Russian National Guard, and from the head of the Republic. It is well known and obvious that yesterday's events around the airport are largely the result of outside interference, including outside information influence.
Putin has been briefed. He's walking a fine line. So far, he's taken a pro-Palestinian position. Last week, he invited the Hamas for talks at the Kremlin. Both sides discussed the current conflict and the status of hostages. Among them are 8 Russian hostages. Moscow has given Hamas a list asking for their release. But will Hamas comply? They've called Russia their quote-unquote closest friend. They say they're looking for the Russian hostages and will release them soon. What about their ties with Israel? Russia's ties with Israel. Putin and Netanyahu used to be friends, but the war in Ukraine has strained the ties. Israel supported the Ukrainian forces, and that led to a rift. Now, as Israel intensifies attacks on Hamas, the consequences may be felt as far away as Russia. It's week 4 of the Israel-Hamas war and the ground invasion has begun, but not how you'd expect it to. There is no all-out invasion of the Gaza Strip. Instead, it's a sustained raid, a prolonged ground incursion. And how much firepower are we talking about? Well, that's the thing. Israel has not revealed its plans or objectives or numbers. All we know is this. Israeli tanks and soldiers are currently inside Gaza. They're fighting the Hamas in the north. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it the second phase of the war.
Yesterday evening, more of our ground forces entered into Gaza in the development of the stronghold of evil. This is the second phase of the war whose goals are clear: the destruction of the military and governmental capabilities of Hamas and the return of the hostages home.
Hamas has also confirmed this. They're talking about quote-unquote heavy fighting in the north. Just one difference though. Israel is not hyping things up this time. They usually document their attacks and raids. They make videos. They release them. They also release footage of how the offensive is going on, but not this time. The ground operations have been closely guarded. Most of the deployments are happening at night. As for footage, this is the only clip we have. Tanks and soldiers on the move, location and date unknown. Reports say the ground operations are focused on two things right now. One is the Hamas tunnels. There is a massive underground network below Gaza. Experts say it could be Hamas's secret weapon. So the IDF is trying to neutralize that. The second area of focus is the Gaza city. It's the largest Palestinian city, also a major power center of the Hamas. Tanks have been spotted on the outskirts of Gaza city. The plan could be to encircle it. And the ground operation does not mean the air raids have stopped. In fact, they have escalated. Israel's Air Force claims to have hit 600 targets in 24 hours. And some of them are controversial. Like the Al-Azhar University, it is located in Gaza City. Israel says the campus was hosting Hamas anti-tank missiles. If true, they could have hampered the ground invasion. So what did the IDF do? Their soldiers guided fighter jets to the university. It was later bombed. Now, tracking all this has become tough. Because over the weekend, Gaza lost connectivity. The internet was knocked out. No phone calls, no video messages, no information. By Sunday evening, the connections were slowly restored. Last we checked, things are getting better. The IDF was asked about the internet blackout. This was their response.
We do what we have to do to secure our forces for as long as we must, temporary or permanent, as much as we need to, and we will not say anything further about that.
All indications are Gaza City will be targeted. The IDF has already struck a university there. They're also asking hospitals to evacuate, like the Al-Quds Hospital and the Al-Shifa Hospital. Both are home to hundreds of civilians. So the IDF is asking them to leave to move further down south. But many Gazans have refused to do so. They say Israeli threats will not work.
Now the Israelis say that they will hit Al-Shifa. Whether they do this or not, this is what is normal for us now. The threats do not frighten us. Let them launch airstrikes as much as they want. We are all martyrs at the end.
So that's Gaza, the southern front. Israel is engaging on the north as well, with Lebanon and Syria. They have struck military targets in Syria. They're also facing off with Lebanon's Hezbollah. Just look at these pictures. They show Israel shooting down Hezbollah rockets. Such exchanges have become quite common in the last 20 days. Hezbollah claims to have carried out 84 attacks along the border. They've also lost 46 fighters so far. The IDF has lost around 7 soldiers. They've stationed tanks and soldiers in the north. The idea here is to deter the Hezbollah. Chances are they will see the ground operation as an opportunity. They may think Israel is busy with Gaza, so it's the perfect chance to open a second front. The Israeli army is trying to prevent that. But let's come back to Gaza for the moment. What is Israel's strategy in Gaza? For 3 weeks, we expected a full-blown invasion. But this operation is not full-blown. It signals limited intent. The question is why? And the answer is 2 possibilities. 1, Israel has decided to shelve the full-scale invasion. Instead, this is their new plan: targeted raids. Or possibility number 2, this is a sneak peek, a precursor to the major invasion. Either way, it signals a change in Netanyahu's thinking. And what could have caused that change in thinking? For starters, his allies were not on board. Europe was against a full-scale invasion. The US wanted a humanitarian pause. In public, Israel rejected both. But in private, maybe they have reservations too. Also, the public sentiment in Israel is not favorable. A big reason for that is the hostages. They're still with Hamas. Hamas holds more than 200 people. Their families want Israel to delay the invasion.
We know when we see that they are speaking about two goals for this operation. One is to bring all the hostages, and the second is to destroy Hamas. And as her boyfriend, I truly afraid that these two goals is like in conflict with each other. They cannot achieve together.
We are very worried about our dearest, that they are there. And we don't know that if the whole military operation take all these hostages under consideration, that nobody will be injured.
So targeted raids could be the answer. Less danger to Israeli troops, less casualties compared to a full-scale assault, and still a blow for Hamas. But can such raids overthrow their rule? That is the big question. Netanyahu said Hamas cannot be allowed to rule Gaza anymore. He promised to destroy them, and that may not be possible with targeted raids. In fact, even with a full invasion, removing Hamas may not be possible because Hamas has supporters and backers across the region, like in Turkey. Their president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has given Hamas a clean chit. He said Hamas is not a terror group, but guess who is? According to Erdogan, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is the terrorist.
Just as Netanyahu is a terrorist, the opposition says Hamas is a terrorist organization as well. Shame on you. Israel, we will declare you as a war criminal to the world. Right now, we are making preparations for this.
And that's the problem with fighting enemies like Hamas. They're not conventional powers. Most of their leaders are abroad, their funders and supporters are abroad. Only the fighters are in Gaza. Maybe a ground offensive can destroy them. But what's stopping a new generation of radicals? A generation that has been directly affected by Israel's operation. Chances are they'll be even more radicalized. And these are all factors that Israel needs to consider. So the war is spreading. It has also divided the world into two different camps. Which one does India belong to? This weekend, New Delhi had a chance to demonstrate that. The United Nations General Assembly was debating a resolution that called for a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the resolution itself is non-binding, but it's a political message. It tells us where each country stands. In India's case, it was an abstention. New Delhi did not vote for or against the resolution that called for a ceasefire. It was neither for nor against the ceasefire. India abstained. And this is how the Indian envoy explained that decision. Listen in.
Terrorism is a malignancy and knows no borders, nationality, or race. The world should not buy into any justification of terror acts. India is deeply concerned at the deteriorating security situation and astounding loss of civilian lives in the ongoing conflict. The escalation of hostilities in the region will only exacerbate the humanitarian crisis. It is necessary for all parties to display the utmost responsibility.
The overall result looked like this. 120 countries supported the resolution, 14 countries opposed it, and 45 countries abstained. Now, the UNGA has 193 members, so the resolution passed. Most of the Arab and Muslim nations supported the resolution, so did countries in the global south, but the West was divided. The United States said no. They voted no. France voted yes. Canada, Germany, and the UK abstained. But our focus tonight is on India. Remember, the resolution called for a ceasefire in this war. India abstained. What does New Delhi's abstention signal? A possible change in policy, an official pro-Israel tilt. There are two reasons why we say this. Number one, India's past record. We looked at recent UNGA votes on the Israel-Palestine issue, specifically on ceasefires. And here's how India has voted. In 2018, there was a call a ceasefire call in Gaza. India voted yes, there should be a ceasefire. In 2009, there was another ceasefire call in Gaza. Again, India voted yes. In 2006, a resolution criticized Israeli military actions in Gaza. India supported it. So the pattern is clear. New Delhi has always called for a ceasefire. But this time we abstained. Reason number 2. Just look at who else abstained with India. Canada, Greece, Australia, the United Kingdom, Japan, Italy. And what's common about these countries? They're all US allies. They do support the two-state solution, but we also know where their loyalties lie, with Israel. The question then is, why did India join this club? Reports say because this resolution did not condemn Hamas. That's why India did not support it. And that's a fair point. This resolution was drafted by Arab countries. It did condemn all forms of terrorism, but it did not specifically name Hamas. And apparently India took offense to that. There was an attempt made to amend this Arab resolution to add the bit about Hamas. Around 88 countries, including India, supported that amendment. But it wasn't enough. To amend a resolution, you need 2/3 majority. At the UNGA, that's around 128 countries. 128 countries should support you for a resolution to be amended. So this amendment was defeated. The original text was put to vote. Hence, India abstained. Now, the opposition in India is not happy about that decision. The Congress party, for instance, has called it shocking and shameful. But it does reflect India's present ties with West Asia. Israel and India have emerged as close friends. There is also a personal equation between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's been clear since October 7th. Prime Minister Modi offered his full support to Israel. In return, Netanyahu dialed Modi. He gave him an update on the status of operations. Plus, there is the issue of terrorism. The trigger here was not the two-state solution or Israeli settlements. The trigger here was a Hamas terror attack. And India knows what that's like, to be a victim of terrorism. Maybe that influenced India's vote as well. But it doesn't mean that New Delhi has abandoned Palestine or the two-state solution. On Sunday, Prime Minister Modi spoke to the President of Egypt, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. The Egyptian readout says the President called for a ceasefire, but the Indian readout does not mention that. It says both leaders agreed on early restoration of peace. So not quite a ceasefire. It's a tough balancing act for India, really. Like the Ukraine war, questions will be asked. There could also be pressure from the Arab world. How India navigates that will be key. If New Delhi keeps abstaining, it could signal a new status quo, a new stage in the dehyphenating of Israel and Palestine. And if we return to backing a ceasefire, well, it would rest all the speculation. It could mean Friday's vote was an anomaly, more to do with the text than the sentiment. Israel keeps saying it will be a long war, so chances are the United Nations General Assembly will be dealing with a lot more resolutions. Speaking of India's challenges, there's a new one much closer home, the Maldives and its incoming president, Mohamed Muizzu. His campaign plank was India out. And as president, he wants to walk the talk. Ever since he's won the presidential election, he's been speaking about India, about how he wants to remove the Indian military from the Maldives. He spoke again yesterday. Let me quote from what he said. This is the president-elect of the Maldives. I will be holding frank and detailed diplomatic consultations with India to work out details of sending back military personnel from the Maldives as soon as possible. The focus is not on the actual number of military personnel here. It is on not having any at all in the Maldives. We will discuss with the Indian government and find out a way forward for this. Muizzu will take office on the 17th of November. His first trip overseas as president will be to India. That's what his advisor said some time back. And it's been a tradition in Mali, really. The president's first visit is to New Delhi. Even the most anti-India ones, like Yamin, did not break this tradition. So Muizzu may come to Delhi. But in the run-up to that, he's setting the tone. He wants India's military to go. Not a partial withdrawal, but a complete exit. That's what he wants. And how many people are we talking about? How many personnel are there? We don't have any official confirmation. Reports say India has some 75 military personnel in the Maldives. And as we've said before, they're there as a support group to help the Maldivian military. Plus, this presence is not really new. India has been sending military officers to Mali for decades. These are not combat troops. They are military engineers, trainers, pilots. Let me also tell you about their role. Over the years, New Delhi has shared military hardware with Mali. This includes 2 helicopters and a Dornier aircraft. Now, this is a versatile plane. It can be used to ferry goods and people. It can also be used for maritime surveillance. Maldivian officers need help with operating these machines, and that is why the Indians are deployed there. Not as an occupying force, but to help boost their security. These aircraft are not under Indian command. They're controlled by the Maldives Defense Force, the Maldives National Defense Force. India's limited role here is assisting in their operations. What's more, New Delhi also pays the bills. India pays for these aircraft and their maintenance. But now, to prove a political point, President-elect Muizu wants India out. This will, of course, have a diplomatic fallout. But more than that, it could also compromise the safety of Maldivians. Yet, the president-elect remains determined. His decision is not based on strategy. It is based on petty politics. And look at the timing. The Maldives has other pressing priorities. Its economy needs urgent attention. Global agencies are sounding an alarm. Soon after the election and Muizu's victory, the creditors came calling. Mali is under debt, and some payments are due. Barely after the election results were announced, the World Bank issued a warning. It said that by 2026, Mali needs to pay a record $1.07 billion in debt. More than $1 billion in debt. These are external loans. They're due by 2026. Now, $1 billion may not sound like a lot of money, but for a country with a GDP of $5.4 billion, this is a significant loan burden. So the World Bank is concerned. And if that wasn't enough, ratings agencies jumped into the fray. Fitch Ratings has raised red flags. Here's what their assessment says. It says the Maldives has a high debt burden. Their debt is rising, but their reserves are low. We have some more numbers. Mali's foreign reserves stood at $700 million, somewhere around $700 million. Considering the loans, they cannot use all these reserves, so only some part of these reserves can be used. Do you know how much that is? Only $168 million, that's all. That's all the money that the Maldives can use from their own reserves. And that's not enough to cover even 3 months of imports. So the risk of default is high, but the president-elect has other priorities. He wants to settle scores with India instead of focusing on keeping his economy afloat. And staying with the neighborhood, it was a violent weekend in Bangladesh. Around 100,000 opposition protesters hit the streets of Dhaka. They shouted slogans, they set things on fire, and they clashed with the police. Take a look. Let's understand the issue here. Who are these protesters? What did they want? And what is the current situation in Bangladesh? Most of the protesters belong to the BNP, that's the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. It is the main opposition party of the country, the BNP. They were joined by members of the Jamaat-e-Islami. It's an Islamist group. It's also a major red flag. The Jamaat has been linked to radicalism in the Indian subcontinent. They're a banned party. They're banned as a party in Bangladesh. Now, what did these protesters want? They wanted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to resign, to appoint a caretaker government. And why is that? Because elections are coming up in Bangladesh. The country's general elections, they're slated for January 2024. The opposition says Sheikh Hasina will rig it. So they want her to resign, to let a caretaker government oversee the election. But the Prime Minister has not agreed. We'll explain what the Bangladesh law says in a bit, but first let me tell you about how the weekend panned out. Around 10,000 cops were deployed in Dhaka. They fired tear gas and rubber bullets. A violent clash followed. At least 3 people lost their lives, more than 100 were injured. And since then, Dhaka cops have been rounding up top leaders, like Mirza Islam Alamgir. He's the chief of the BNP, the opposition party, and he's been leading this party since Khaleda Zia's house arrest. Zia, as you would know, is a former prime minister. She's been convicted of corruption. Her supporters want her to pull a Nawaz Sharif to leave the country for medical reasons. But so far, the government has not agreed to this. So that's the ground situation. Many injured, leaders behind bars, and a nervous calm after a major crackdown. Now we come to the politics. Is there any threat to Sheikh Hasina's rule? Her tenure has brought economic growth to Bangladesh. Poverty has reduced, jobs have been created, and Bangladesh is now the world's garment capital. But there are problems too. Recently, inflation has started increasing. Food prices were up 12% in August. It's the highest in almost 12 years. Plus, there are accusations of extrajudicial actions, like enforced disappearances and crackdowns on free speech. But will they be enough to oust Sheikh Hasina? The opposition says yes, but only if elections are held under a caretaker government. Which brings us to the law. Does Bangladeshi law require a caretaker government? No, it doesn't. The Supreme Court of Bangladesh has called it unconstitutional. Their parliament has removed it from the country's rule book. And why is that? Because it did not work. The caretaker provision was introduced in the 1990s. The last caretaker government took charge in the year 2006. It should have stepped down after 90 days. It did not. It ended up ruling until 2008. This caretaker government jailed politicians, including Sheikh Hasina and Khaleda Zia. So there was good reason to end it. Having said that, there is criticism about the current setup. For example, the European Union has taken issue. They usually send a full team of election observers to Dhaka, but not this time. This time, Brussels says necessary conditions are not in place. And what about India? New Delhi has clarified its position. They did it earlier this year. They pointed to Bangladesh's constitution.
I don't have really any particular comment on internal developments there. On the issue of caretaker government, the constitution has a position on it, and we haven't really commented on that. I don't have anything for you on that specifically. I wouldn't like to get into speculation of third parties, military interventions. Certainly those are speculative. And we would hope the elections are held peacefully as they are being scheduled.
It's no secret that India likes doing business with Sheikh Hasina. Her vision aligns with that of New Delhi, peaceful and cooperative. Whether that continues or not depends on the elections next year. It promises to be a crucial one for Bangladesh and the neighborhood. Now back to the Israel-Hamas war. This conflict is also being fought on the digital front. Since the war began, millions have turned to social media to comprehend it. And this has led to the growth of homegrown influencers in Gaza. They too are fighting the war. Their weapons of choice are Snapchat, TikTok, and Instagram. These influencers are highlighting the plight of their people. They're bringing first-hand accounts to the world. But they also have some competition. Israelis too are posting videos on social platforms. They're sharing their side of the story. Some of them are also mocking Palestinian suffering. And now this war is impacting children in more ways than one. Many of them are attending protests virtually on platforms like Roblox. Our next report tells you more.
Yesterday we have to evacuate the whole building. I have to leave my room, my house, and my memories to go to a place that is no safer than my house. So we had to return back home because if I'm gonna die in my house.
This was Salma Shurab, a 22-year-old dental student. She lives in Gaza. Earlier, her activity on social media was far from geopolitics. She often talked about dentistry, fashion, and travel. But since October 7th, she has taken to social media for a completely different reason: to inform her family and friends about her situation.
I'm scared to death right now. I'm at the roof looking at the view. It's in Hayy al-Daraj. They have started already. There's no shelters for us. The safest place to be is my home.
I've witnessed so many aggressions on Gaza, but yet have I ever seen anything this aggressive. This time I'm doubting that I'll make it out alive.
And to inform the world about the plight of Gazans.
Did you know that a whole city is being wiped off the face of the earth right now, and the world's doing nothing about it?
But Shurab is hardly the only one. This video was posted by Sara Al-Saka, a general surgeon. In her videos, she talked about hospitals being overloaded with patients. The beginning of the Israel-Hamas war has birthed a league of homegrown influencers. They are sharing first-hand experiences with the world. But remember, even if it's on the digital front, this is war. So Israelis too have taken to social media to share their side of the story. But some Israelis are also posting videos mocking Palestinian suffering. In this video, an Israeli woman makes fun of how Gazans are losing electricity, water and internet. Here, another is sharing a makeup tutorial on how to be Palestinian, with ketchup qualifying as fake blood. If this wasn't bad enough, in many videos, parents are even involving their children. They are dressing up kids to make fun of Palestinian children who are struggling to survive. In the online realm, hateful messages can spread like wildfire, and they may land in front of unsuspecting viewers like children. In the wake of this war, teens are attending pro-Palestinian protests. Except it's not in real life. It's virtually on Roblox, an online gaming platform, where the users can create their own games. These protests have been visited close to 300,000 times. Participants have joined from all across the world, West Asia, Europe, the US, and especially Malaysia. That's where most of the participants came from. Many of them are not even teenagers. About 60% of Roblox users are 16 years old or younger. 45% are 12 years old or younger. In Malaysia, the law prohibits anyone below the age of 15 from taking part in protests. But guess what? These young protesters have found a loophole. The law doesn't apply to a virtual game. Now, it may be a game, but it's no child's play. With online content, viewers may not even realize when they're engaging with anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim, or anti-Semitic content, when the news is fake or hurtful. And this can have real-life repercussions. This is the reality of a modern war, and with social media, it's often a losing battle.
Now let's turn our attention to West Africa. A different war has been playing out here. A terrorist insurgency, especially in the Sahel region. It is just south of the Sahara Desert. Terror groups have been active here in Sahel for years now. And now they're looking to expand their operations. They have set new targets. They're eyeing the coastal nations below the Sahel. These are relatively peaceful countries. How do they plan to defend themselves? Europe has offered to help with more weapons. Europe wants to arm the coastal nations in West Africa. And this weekend, the EU took a step in that direction.
Today, we come together to officially unveil a generous donation of 105 militarized vehicles provided by the European Union to support the counter-terrorism efforts of the Ghana Armed Forces.
The focus is on Ghana. The European Union has sent 105 armored vehicles. Now, Ghana is a nation in West Africa. It's a country of about 34 million people. It is also one of the richer nations in terms of GDP. Its nominal GDP is $76 billion. It ranks 11th in the continent of 54 countries. Ghana is also rich in resources. It is one of Africa's largest gold producers. Other major exports are cocoa and crude oil. So in theory, Ghana is better off than most nations in West Africa. In fact, most of the countries along the Gulf of Guinea are resource rich, which may be why Europe wants to ensure that they remain stable. The armored vehicles to Ghana are part of a broader outreach, a broader military aid outreach. It's going to 4 countries in the Gulf of Guinea: Ghana, Ivory Coast, Togo, and Benin. They will all get military aid from the European Union, about $650 million in all.
I think that we are all aware that the spillover of insecurity from the Sahel to the Gulf of Guinea is not a risk, it's a reality. It's like climate change. It's not something that may happen in 20 years from now. It's happening now.
That was the EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell. He says the spillover of terror from the Sahel is already underway, and that is why Ghana is preparing itself for the fight. But the country may be ill-equipped to keep extremism out for 2 reasons: its geography and its economy. Let's tell you about the geography first. Ghana is close to the terror hotspots in West Africa, the Sahel states. They touch Ghana's northern border. It is at the edge of the insurgency, and that's one reason why the country is on alert. The second reason is Ghana's precarious economic situation. We mentioned earlier how the country is resource rich, but that has not translated to a wealthy population. In fact, Ghana's people have been struggling of late. Last year, they suffered an economic crisis. There was high inflation and mounting public debt. Ghana's debt is about 90% of its GDP. It got so bad that Ghana defaulted on loans to foreign lenders. This was last December. They defaulted. The country had to take a $3 billion bailout from the IMF. Its 17th IMF loan since it became independent. So you can see why the economy is in dire straits. Since Ghana has to keep paying back foreign loans, domestic payments take a backseat. This leads to unpaid salaries and crumbling infrastructure. Last week, the country was plunged into darkness. Electricity was cut across Ghana. And remember, this is an oil and gas-rich country. Theoretically, it should not have any power problems, but it does. And they're expected to get worse in the years to come. This kind of economic crisis breeds instability, and terror groups use that instability to recruit people. The crisis in Ghana could be a gateway for the terrorists, which is why the EU is focusing on this country. The armored cars were just the military outreach. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz will visit Ghana tomorrow. It's the second part of his West Africa tour. The first part included Nigeria. Olaf Scholz went to Nigeria. He promised investments in the gas sector. He's trying to boost trade in the region. Both these strategies will help Ghana as well. But will this be enough to steady the country's economy? Will the armored vehicles be enough to prevent an insurgency? Guess we'll have to wait and see. We'll keep you posted. Now let's look at what's happening in France. Emmanuel Macron has made a new promise. No, the French president does not want to mediate in a war again. This time it's about France's abortion rights. Macron wants to enshrine them in the constitution by next year. But why suddenly? It's because of what's happening across the globe. Abortion rights are on the backslide. Nations are clamping down on women's rights on their own bodies. So France wants to avoid a situation like that. And the best way to do it is to make these rights irreversible, to enshrine the right in the constitution. Our next report tells you more about Macron's plans.
The First World War had just ended in Europe, and the country needed to boost its birth rate. It needed to make up for the loss of population. So, France banned abortion. Since then, it was a series of challenges for French women. There were protests, there were demonstrations, and women fought hard for their rights. So finally, in 1975, France gave in. The country decriminalized abortion. Since then, France has enacted several laws. It was all done to improve conditions for abortions. Currently, abortion laws in France protect the anonymity of women. They guarantee their health, and the cost is borne by the French social security system. In 2022, 234,000 abortions were carried out in France. So women in France do have abortion rights, but Emmanuel Macron now wants to make them irreversible. He wants to enshrine these rights in the constitution. So his government will submit a draft text to the French top court. The aim is to make abortion rights constitutional by the end of 2024. Now, of course, this is a tough move. Changing the French constitution is a complicated process. It can either be done by a referendum or approval by at least 3/5 of the parliament. The resolution was backed by the National Assembly last November, and this February it was passed in the Senate. The right wing did argue that France's abortion rights were not at risk, but the government doesn't want to take any chances. They want to enshrine it in the constitution. Now, France's move is not happening in a vacuum. Across the world, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back for global abortion rights. While some countries are legalizing abortion, others, like the United States, are abolishing it. And it's the reversal of the historic Roe versus Wade that left France alarmed. Plus, the women of France want the guarantee too. A recent survey says 89% of women want it enshrined in the constitution. Which brings us to global abortion rights. Abortion is still banned in 15 countries globally. In some countries, it's only allowed in cases of rape and medical malformation. Others have oppressive rules like the heartbeat law. meaning if you can detect the fetal heartbeat, the abortion cannot happen. Currently, only 35% of women within the reproductive age live in countries where they can access safe abortion. So they are left with unsafe choices, also known as backstreet abortions. And this leads to a lot of deaths. 39,000 women die every year due to unsafe abortions. And this is only the official figure. The real number is likely much higher. So at a time when women's bodies have become the battleground for politics, France's move is a step in the right direction. Enshrining it in the constitution would make it permanent, meaning no reversal no matter who heads the government. France hopes to make it official by next year, and the women of France hope to finally breathe a permanent sigh of relief.
Our next story is about our planet, the Earth. It is leaking. Before I tell you what, let me ask you a question. What do birthday parties and space exploration missions have in common? Helium, that's what they have in common, a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas. In all likelihood, it is leaking out of the very core of our planet. But not any helium gas, it's helium-3. The same gas that is produced by the sun, the gas that covers the moon's surface, a gas that has the potential to be a powerful source of energy. Now the Earth's core is leaking that gas. So should you be scared or excited? I will let you decide. Here's a report.
This is the Baffin Island. It's the largest island in Canada. It's known for its grand wild landscape with vast water bodies and towering mountains. But these days it's making news for another reason. Thanks to rocks scattered across the island. Volcanic rocks that have been detected on the island. Here's what makes them special. They contain helium-3. Let's tell you why that's a big deal. Helium is an odorless, colorless, tasteless gas. Helium-3 is a type of helium gas. It's light and stable. This is the same gas that's produced by the sun. The same gas that covers the moon's surface. It's readily available in the cosmos. But on Earth, it's rare to find. Except now, it could be leaking out of the Earth's core. Before you panic, let us tell you what's happening. Scientists have known for a while that the Earth was leaking. They don't know exactly when it started, but they say it's been leaking for a millennia. The catch is, they don't know what's leaking. New studies say volcanic rocks on the Baffin Island provide an insight into this. These rocks contain helium-3, so there's a good chance that helium-3 is leaking out of our planet. It could be trapped in the Earth's core, slowly escaping and making its way to the Earth's surface in the form of rocks. You see, the Earth is said to have swallowed helium as an infant. This was about 4.6 billion years ago. Ever since then, every time the Earth has spit out lava, it burps out the helium. And this is not just a gross analogy. Helium is the kind of element that doesn't make friends easily. It's light, so it hardly stays on Earth. Most of it escapes into the atmosphere. This makes it rare on the planet. In fact, it's one of the biggest unknowns in geology. No one knows how much of it there is beneath our feet, or exactly how some of it remains in the lava, at least enough to form rocks. But scientists are trying to find just that. They're trying to confirm that helium-3 is leaking from the Earth. Because if that's true, it will be an exciting find. Helium-3 can tell us a whole lot about how the Earth was formed. It can tell us why the process began, or when, or how the Earth leaks. And if more helium-3 is found on the planet, other benefits could follow. The gas has the potential to produce energy, vast amounts of it. It could act as fuel for nuclear reactors, or give a boost to space missions. The best part is, helium leaking from our planet does not affect it. It does not have any negative implications or impact, either on humanity or the environment. So, by the looks of it, the benefits of helium-3 await the Earth. Or, in the words of Friends character Ross Geller, geology rocks.
Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In New York, Matthew Perry fans placed flowers in front of the apartment building where the hit TV show Friends was shot. The Friends star passed away at the age of 54 on Sunday. In the United Kingdom, animals digged into their Halloween treats that were hidden inside pumpkins. And in Argentina, thousands dressed up as Spider-Man as they aim to break the record of the biggest Spider-Man gathering. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1961, the Soviet Union tested a hydrogen bomb called the Tsar Bomba. It was the most powerful nuclear weapon ever created and tested. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.